Welcome back to another live edition of the Couch GM podcast. This is another Gary Hill Jr. Podcast episode. Looking forward to talking shop with Gary all about the Mariners. The last time we were on, Mariners have gotten hot and they've really turned things up. First, a quick note from our sponsors, Black Label Supplements. They are a third-party tested, third-party approved, player tested, athlete tested supplement company. I've been using them for a while now with protein, pre-workout, creatine. Check out blacklabelsupplements.com. Use code CouchGM for 15% off your order. And with that, let's bring in Gary Hill Jr., who is now in Baltimore before the Mariners start their series with the Orioles. Gary, how's it going?
It's going good. It's good to be in Baltimore. How you doing?
Doing good. Yeah, I mean, we were talking a little off air. I don't want to say that we were the one that sparked this stretch from the Mariners, but since our last live stream on April 11th, they're 19-12. They're 11-4 over the last 15 home games. They've really put things together. Their pitching staff has been historic, elite. Mm-hmm. Their offense has been working to find its rhythm. So really looking forward to talking shop and what you've seen with the Mariners.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It has been a really good stretch. It's funny. You mentioned the record. I think the third best record in the American League in that stretch. So, and it's pretty prolonged stretch now. We're talking about over a month of baseball. It's funny how they've gotten there, and I know we'll get into it, but the starting pitching has been, I mean, we knew it'd be good, right? But that stretch they put together, the historic stretch, it just seemed like it was 1-0 after another, and you just really came to expect it. Whenever a guy gave up 3 runs, it's like, what just happened?
Right. What was the stat? Was it 18 or 19 quality starts in a row, something like that?
Yeah. And they were on a track where they were giving up as many earned runs as starts, which was pretty ridiculous when you get into the 20s, right? When you've had 21 starts and you've given up 21 earned runs as a staff. I've just never seen anything like that. I mean, you see a guy or two get hot at a time, but you don't see all 5 guys dominate for a stretch, and that's really what we saw. And at the same time, the offense has been better, which has helped and has led to this current streak, which has been pretty good. And, it's just been winning one series after another outside of the Minnesota series. It's been just consistent baseball, consistent winning.
They've now won 8 series out of their last 9. Weeds of it. I have a quick non-baseball question. I was just in Michigan a couple weekends ago for my wife's graduation from grad school. I'm curious how you deal with the jet lag throughout the season. Honestly, what do you do when you go to the East Coast when you're coming back? How does that affect you? And what do you do to fight against that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's the reality of our lives. You think about people travel, go on vacation and whatnot. The trick for what we do is like, we're doing something the next day. There's a game the next day. So we're always working. It's not like you have time to just relax and shut it down for a day and get it together. It's like, no, we're back at the ballpark at whatever city we happen to be in. So a couple things I do. I generally stay on West Coast time no matter where we are. I find that kind of helps, whether we're Central Time or Eastern Time. So, like tonight, it's 10 p.m. here already. I'll stay up pretty late tonight. So the reentry back home is smooth. And I feel like everyone has to find whatever their thing is on the road. For me, it's getting outside and taking a run. Like that really helps me every single day. Just one, it's just nice to have a routine no matter where you are, but it makes me feel good. I just feel better getting outside and running around. And for me, it's also sleep, like getting as much sleep as you can on the road, which is easier said than done. It's about taking care of yourself because it is a long season. It's a grind. This is a tough stretch. It's a great example. We were home for like 6 days and it goes by in the blink of an eye. And here we are back on the road. And you try and eat right. You try and take care of your body. I mean, we're not playing, we're not athletes, but to get through a season, you do have to take care of yourself. Otherwise, you're just not going to make it. You'd just be dragging by the end.
Absolutely. And do you know off the top of your head how many trips you guys have throughout the season to the East Coast?
I've not counted this year. Last year was like 8 or 9. They sent us out forever. I have not counted how many Eastern trips we have this year. It wouldn't surprise me if it was 6 or 7 at least. Just different trips out. Fortunately, this year they bunched a few. They helped us out. Like they sent us to Cleveland, and then we got Tampa and Florida all in the same one. It's a bad trip at once. But for me, I would rather be on like a 3 city Eastern trip and then come back. Like, hey, we're out here. Like, give me one more city instead of a 2 city stop. It makes it long and grueling, but just get it out of the way. So I think we have fewer East Coast trips this year, but it ends up being a lot. We spent a lot of time in the Eastern time zone.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I was in Michigan for 5 days, and coming, I was tired the entire time, and then I came back and I was tired for a couple of days when I got back. It's like, how do these people do it? And then, let alone the athletes that are out there trying to hit 100-mile-an-hour fastball while also
You know,
dealing with those effects.
that's the trick. I mean, we're not doing anything. We're just
Right.
yakking away in the broadcast booth. I mean, they're the ones that have to go on the field and run around and perform and everything else. I mean, they have a lot more to fight through than we do. But the travel thing is real. And the Mariners are at a disadvantage, obviously, because of where they are and how many miles the Mariners fly during the course of the season. And the Mariners treat us well. We're in comfort when we do it. We stay in nice places. We have a nice plane. At the same time, like it's a lot of time, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. Like we're in the air a lot, and we have a lot more miles than everyone else. And when we get back home, it's always late on a Sunday. Like those things are just the reality of it, and it's real. It's tough to deal with, but you find a way, and you get used to it, and you find a way to deal with it, and you do your best you can with it. So, is what it
Uh,
is.
yeah. Speaking of miles, someone commented on Instagram stating that they're going to be watching this live stream from Australia tonight. So if you're on the stream watching this from Australia, thank you for tuning in. To the rest of you, if you have any questions or comments, please make sure to comment below, and we'll get to it at some point. So now let's get back into baseball. So talking from April 11th, our last live stream, the pitching staff was struggling a little bit. The offense was definitely in a rut. What have you seen over this past month specifically that it has turned around for both sides of the team?
Yeah, so the rotation, as we touched on, has been excellent, and that's the backbone of the Mariners, and that's been the backbone of this stretch. That's set the table for everything. Uh, I think we can't say enough about Andres Munoz and what he has done in this stretch. And with the injuries they've had in the back end of the bullpen, he has more than picked up the slack. We've already seen 4 multi-inning saves so far this season. He has just been a monster in the back end of the bullpen. And I find it really fascinating how he's doing it because it's a little different than a couple years ago when he was really dominant. And he's dominant again now, but in a kind of different way, which is fascinating. And for me, like when we talked last time, every guy was cold essentially, except for Rojas and Cal. And I feel like right now there are more guys moving in the right direction. And that's through some injuries too. Like JP obviously has been out for a while, and Garver and Polanco have been in and out a little bit and out the last couple of days. So they've had some things to fight through. Yet you look at the May numbers going into a couple days ago, and they were essentially middle of the pack in everything for the month, like runs scored and WRC plus and on base percentage and batting average and everything, which I think is great because when I look at this Mariners offense, you don't have to be a top 5. Hey, it'd be great if they were top 5. Like no one would complain about that. But if you put yourself in the middle of the pack, they're going to win a lot of games because of the pitching staff. And it's funny because the strikeout rate is still the same. It's still the highest. They had the highest in April. They had the highest in May. For me, the biggest difference is they're hitting the ball out of the ballpark and they're slugging, which they weren't doing at all to start the season. Like they had the high strikeout rate. They didn't have the production to go along with it. Like you can survive a high strikeout rate. And it'd be great if they weren't at the very bottom. I think that's kind of an obvious statement. But if you're slugging, that can cover up a lot. And they've been slugging. And for me, that's been the biggest difference for the offense.
Yeah, I believe it was on the year they're 20th in OPS in baseball, but over the past 7 days and the past 15 days, they're 8th in OPS. So, and a lot of their guys, Julio hasn't gotten hot, Polanco
Right.
hasn't gotten hot, Mitch Garver, a lot of these guys that they plan to have be key pieces in their lineup haven't even gotten into the swing of things. So if their offense starts getting hot, their pitching is going to be there. This is going to be a scary team heading into the summer.
Yeah, I agree. And I was kind of on our flight to Baltimore, I was kind of penciling out, assuming JP would be back at some point on this trip, assuming we'll see Polanco and Garver. And I was kind of penciling out what lineups would look like. It is pretty interesting because for me, Luke Raley has been a big part to what the Mariners have done the past week. And he's really earned himself playing time moving forward because he has been really good offensively. We've seen it with the power. We've seen him on the bases, and that's been a key as well. And he's a guy that can move around in the outfield, which is a nice, especially in Baltimore, because left field is enormous. But with Canzone back, with JP back, with Garver and Polanco, it's pretty interesting when you start to write out what this lineup may look like against a right-handed pitcher or against a left-handed pitcher. I feel like right now they have as many options as they've had all season about what a lineup could look like. And you could be batting Ty France 7th, 8th, Mitch Haniger 7th, 8th. You know, it's that kind of depth that you're looking at. And I'm fascinated. I'd like to hear what you think about this too. Like we've been talking about, so when JP comes back, he's leading off. Where do you put Rojas? Where does he end up in the lineup? There's a lot of interesting facets, I think, to this offense, especially we'll find out on this road trip what it will look like.
That is a tough question. And because, I mean, we just saw that JP Crawford got hit on the hand yesterday
Yeah.
in Tacoma. We'll see how long it takes him. I mean, my initial thought is, I mean, because JP's been leadoff for the longest time, since
Right.
last year. Do you slot him back there and then put Rojas 9, or do you start off JP 9 so that he could work back into it and keep Rojas the hot guy batting leadoff? Because, among like third baseman in the AL, I think he's like top 3 in leading some categories. Also, I'm
Yeah.
curious with Josh Rojas. I heard that Jerry Dipoto was, when they traded Paul Sewald last year, that he was a key piece in the trade that they were really trying to get. I'm curious what you've heard internally about Josh Rojas. What did they see before that trade? And I mean, obviously, this is the production that they might have been seeing or looking for.
Yeah, and just so you know, this is not a narrative now because of how he's playing. Jerry said this to me and Aaron when we recorded the Wheelhouse at the time. He told us that Josh Rojas was a must-have in the deal. They thought that highly of him. They obviously were really high in Canzone, but Rojas was a guy they had to have included to make the deal happen. And at the time, we're like, because not knowing much about Josh Rojas, we from the outside, I think we're not alone on this. I don't think a lot of people looked at him as the key to that deal moving forward or not. But Jerry is adamant that that was it. And the way he's played this year, like, yeah, good thing because he's been great. And at times he's been the most consistent offensive player they've had all season. And getting back to the lineup construction, a thought that I was thinking about in the near term. He's not a prototypical 3-hitter, but it would be interesting. JP leading off, Julio second, Rojas, Cal. That kind of interchange early, and just riding. Rojas is the hot hand, riding the hot hand to see what a lineup construction like that would look like. You'd have JP and Rojas, a couple of guys at the top, especially with JP, takes a lot of pitches. It's a very different first 4 in the order if you did it that way. I think it'd be interesting if they tried that. I'm not sure if they will or not, but I think it'd be interesting.
Honestly, now that you mentioned it, it makes complete sense. You go lefty, righty, lefty switch.
Yeah.
And especially if Mitch Garver and Jorge Polanco aren't quite, at their potential in the lineup at this point. That makes a lot of sense.
You're going Garver, Polanco 5'6", 6'7", depending on, maybe you put Raley right behind Cal with the way he's going. And I could see the Mariners doing more of this too. Like Raley's been hitting, Rojas has been hitting. Let's give him more plate appearances. So we'll see if they start playing the hot hand, because they do have, with everyone healthy, they have a lot more options to play matchups and move guys around. And it's super valuable too. It's something that we shouldn't overlook. The fact that Rojas can play a lot of different places. We saw him start 3 games in a row in 3 different spots, which, man, talk about value for a guy that's been your best hitter and you can move him around. And the same with Raley. Like, he can play all 3 outfield positions. He can play first.
Yep.
So it gives you so many more options when you're healthy and some guys are hitting well.
Speaking of Josh Rojas and Nuke Rayleigh, Josh Rojas, 112 plate appearances, batting 330 on the year, 395 on base percentage, and 877 OPS, which is 157 OPS plus. So 57% better than the average league hitter. With Luke Rayleigh in May, he's batting 375, a 444 on base percentage, and a 1.132 OPS. So Luke Rayleigh, now that he's been starting to get some of those more consistent reps with Dominic Canzone when he was out, now he's back. We'll see how they, work him in there also. He's starting to get some more consistent at bats and show that potential that we saw when they made that trade this offseason for Luke Rayleigh. So, yeah, things are trending in the right direction. And some of the players that you didn't necessarily expect to count on are there. And now it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I'm really intrigued by Rayleigh because his skill set is so unique. Like he's enormous when you see him in person.
Yeah,
He looks like a linebacker, right? And the way but he's
he's
fast.
fast. Yeah.
He's got a ton of power. He can move around, and he hasn't played at the major league level a lot. Like he doesn't have a lot of experience in the majors, and I'm really interested to see where it all goes with Luke Rayleigh. I'm talking to Scott. He loves him, and he loves some of the off the field aspects that we don't see. He said he's a guy that plays with a lot of grit, and he loves to fit in the clubhouse. He's a guy that is always running hard, and that actually showed up against the Royals. You remember that play at third base where Frazier kind of bobbled it, and Rayleigh was steaming to third and actually beat Frazier to the bag, and he earned the Mariners a run just with his speed and hustle. Scott, he couldn't compliment him enough on some of those intangibles that he loves about Luke Rayleigh too. So he's a guy that we should definitely be watching here moving forward. And going to Yankee Stadium for 4 games, the short porch there, like any lefty that's hitting well, their eyes should light up going to that ballpark. This could be a really interesting road trip, and we know Baltimore much more favorable for lefty hitters than righty hitters too. So for a guy like Rayleigh, this could be a really good road trip.
And also Canzone, I mean, he could put it in the upper deck
Yeah,
at Yankee
for sure.
Stadium. And, when that kind of brings another question. Canzone was kind of the favorite before he got hurt. He was getting a lot of the reps in the ABs. How do you see the playing time in the outfield moving forward? You got Julio in center. You got, one of the guys, Luke Rayleigh or Dominic Canzone in left. You got Mitch Haniger in right. How did they cycle through those guys, do you think, especially with Mitch Garver being DH?
Yeah, I think we'll see some more platoon action, and maybe not like a straight platoon, like Haniger only playing against lefties. Like I don't think it will be that, but I think we'll lean more towards that. Would be my guess, and not just Haniger, but Ty France too, Garver too, because you can move Rayleigh, for example, cycle him through a bunch of different spots, and then when you have a lefty, like all the righties would be in the lineup. So I kind of see it playing out like that. And truly I see it as a hot hand scenario. Like Rayleigh right now he's going to be in the lineup. He's going to get the
Mhm.
playing time because he's scolding. And maybe next week that's Dom Canzone. And Haniger's the last few days has been much better too. So maybe it's Mitch Haniger for a week or two. But I do think it's important too when you look at the histories of Garver and Polanco and Haniger, like you want to keep them healthy through the season. So when you have a healthy unit, it is important to give those guys days, day games after night games, that sort of thing. So that will play into it, but also matchups, I think, will play into it a lot.
Yeah. And then an awesome stat that I saw from the last Mariners game notes is that Mitch Haniger, he let's see here, his 55th career home run at T-Mobile Park broke a tie with Edgar Martinez and Ichiro Suzuki all time at T-Mobile Park. He's now tied for 9th most in park history, and he's tied for 7th most with Richie Sexton. And Hall of Famer Adrian Beltre is 1 away. So Mitch Haniger, he's pretty tenured with the Mariners. He's produced, and now he's passing some of those all-time Mariner greats.
He was really funny when we asked him about that. Like whenever you put yourself with Edgar Martinez in Mariners history, like you're doing something great.
Or
He did
Ichiro.
say, Yeah, right. He did say, yeah, if Edgar would have spent his entire career in T-Mobile Park, I wouldn't have caught him, which I thought was a very funny statement. But yeah, he's been great for the Mariners, and I mean we've seen it. We've seen guys come to T-Mobile Park and struggle to knock the ball out of the yard, and that's something that Mitch has conquered. Like he has not had issues with that. He has hit the long ball at T-Mobile Park. So, and he feels like there's guys no matter how long their tenure is with the Mariners like Nelson Cruz is one of those guys to me. Didn't spend a long time with the Mariners for what 4 years. Uh, that they are always Mariners, right? No matter what happens
Right.
with Mitch Haniger in his career, like he's always going to be able to come back, and he's beloved, and fans have loved him and what he's done and his attitude and how much he loves it here and part of the playoff push and the whole thing. He's just one of those guys that will always be beloved to me by the Mariner fan base.
Absolutely. And then getting into so Bryan Woo just made his return. We were at the game last Friday, and that was a bit scary when he, after that extended inning, but then he came back this last start and he had a great outing again. He's recorded 101 career strikeouts through his first 20 starts in franchise history, with at least 100 strikeouts in his first 20 career starts, joining Felix Hernandez, Michael Pineda, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Mark Langston, Roenis Elias, and Bryce Miller. 4 of the 8 that have had 100 strikeouts or more in their first 20 career starts are in this active rotation right now. I mean, that's just
that says it all, doesn't it? I mean, that's wild, and that's a great list. Those are some of the best in Mariners history. I thought Woo was awesome against Kansas City, and you're right. Like everyone was so nervous when he went out against Oakland. Like, oh no! But man, watching him back in these first 2 games, that fastball is just so electric, and it's funny because the swings we see on it, and it's 94. He's not blowing at 104, but guys just don't pick it up. The swings, sometimes I feel like he could tell you it's coming over the plate at 94 right down the middle, and still he would get a swing through on it. It is just remarkable. And for me, what's been most exciting is, when I thought about Woo and Miller coming into the season, to me, it was all about, okay, what are they going to do against lefties? Because they both handled righties so well last year. And we know the Miller story. He's been great against lefties, and part of it, the new arsenal, the splitter, and everything else. And for Woo, it's not a new arsenal. He's got basically the same that he's working with. So I've been curious, like, okay, what's it going to look like? And so far, so good. Like he's handled lefties really well. And man, he was super efficient against Kansas City. He ran into the hiccup in his final inning, but man, I don't think you could have asked for anything more from Woo in these first 2 starts. And it does, watching him deal in those 2 games and what we see from Miller. And this is what I think we talked about this early in the season, because we were confident about the top 3 in the rotation. And for me, where this rotation would go as a group depended on the 4 and the 5. And from what we've seen from Miller and Woo, it is unbelievable. It really is. You've got 5 guys where on paper you almost have the matchup every single night, the matchup in your favor. There's some nights you don't, but a lot of nights you do, which is amazing. It's a great starting point.
Yeah, it's insane. And Bryan Woo, he kind of like Paul Sewald, his arm slot is coming out of the sprinkler. So it's that unique arm slot to where you're not used to seeing it.
That's a great way to put it.
And then also speaking to the fastballs, I saw a stat that Shota Imanaga has the most valuable pitch in baseball, and it's his four-seam fastball, which averages 92. So it's like you don't need 100. It helps at times, but if you just have a unique look to your pitch, like a Bryan Woo, I mean, the effectiveness is there. And looking at his platoon splits so far versus righties, he's allowing an 071 batting average versus lefties, a 167. And then if we go to Bryce Miller, yeah, it was all coming down to how he does against lefties. Pulling up his splits here, I know it's in the 100s.
Yeah.
A 133 batting average against Bryce Miller against lefties. a 553 OPS, and then against righties a 231 batting average. So
Mhm.
that splitter has done wonders for Bryce Miller and Brian Wu to get him back. Emerson Hancock, did his job to kind of bridge that gap,
Yeah.
but to now have Brian Wu and that's a potential 5 aces now instead of 4.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I thought Hancock did a really good job too. Like for most of his starts, he gave the Mariners a chance to win. And I think when Hancock takes the ball, that's what you're asking for. And they'll need him again. He'll make starts for the Mariners again this year. But man, you just feel great about the 5. And I just I keep doing this I look at every series as a whole. And this Baltimore series is a great example. Yeah, Miller, Castillo, Kirby. And you end up saying, man, the rotation really lines up well for Baltimore. And it's like I keep saying that every series because it lines up well every series because when you have 5 guys cooking, of course it lines up well. It's
Because it
funny how
doesn't end.
uh,
Yeah.
yes, it doesn't end. It just keeps connecting to the next guy. And we'll say the same thing about how the rotation lines up against the Yankees because 4 of the 5 guys are going to go and you'll feel great about all 4 of them.
So how do you looking at the AL West so far this year? I don't know how many people saw the Astros with this kind of start. Anyone, if anyone did. What's your take on the AL West as a whole so far? The Oakland A's have been stingy. They've got some great players like Mason Miller. You have to have a lead in order
Yeah.
for him to pitch, but they've got some guys that have the talent and they're putting it together a bit.
I have found myself watching more ninth innings of Oakland A's baseball than I
Oh my
expected
word.
this year. Because anytime I get a chance to see Miller pitch, I am watching. That guy is unbelievable so far. He's just sawing through lineups. Yeah, I give the A's credit. They have been much better this year, and I think better than we expected. I th- when they were in town, they were on their 18th win, and they didn't pick up their 18th win until they were like 18-50 last year. We're talking like mid June. Like it's a completely different situation for them. So they've been competitive and pesky. Uh, Man, you were right about the Astros. That thing has been a real mess. They're still super talented. So you figure at some point they're going to put a run together. But Mariners have been in similar positions where they have dug themselves not this big of a hole, but they've dug themselves holes early in seasons. And we've witnessed how hard it is to come back from that. It has taken the Mariners like big runs. Like, remember August last year? That was one of the best months in team history. And
Right.
to dig themselves out of the hole, and they still fell short. Like 7 games is a lot. It's a lot to overcome. And, you can do it, but you've got to play really well for a long period of time, or you've got to be just scorching hot for like 2 months. And even that, you need some help. You need other teams not to play as well. So I'm not counting the Astros out, but I do have questions about their pitching and their rotation and all the injuries they've suffered because it's going to be hard to make a run if your starting pitching is inconsistent. Like I think their bullpen will get together. I think those guys are too good not to be good moving forward. But I do wonder about the rotation. And if the rotation can't figure it out, like no matter how good Tucker is, who I think is a great hitter, and no matter how good Alvarez is, who's obviously a great hitter, like that's a lot to overcome when your rotation isn't clicking and already you're in the hole. At Texas is interesting. They've kind of been how I expected them to be. Like the offense has carried them. Because again, hey, they overcame it last year. So what do I know? But the pitching to me just isn't there. Like they have bullpen questions, they have rotation questions. Like Dunning has been better than I expected, but he's on the IL. I mean, they have a whole rotation on the IL,
Right.
and
An all-star
you know,
rotation.
yeah, they're surviving it, I guess. But to me, getting swept in Colorado is a red flag. Colorado had not swept anyone since Milwaukee in May of last year. They had one sweep last year. It was the Brewers, and they beat Texas in the series for their first series win, and then they swept them the next day. And then Texas lost the first 2 against Cleveland. So they're stumbling a little bit. They do have some injuries offensively too. Like Leiter's come up, and he hasn't been good. So they sent him back down. And I know
Right.
they're kind of waiting for the Scherzer DeGrom combo. My question is, who are they getting with Scherzer and DeGrom? You know, are they going to be,
Right.
is Scherzer going to be Scherzer? Is DeGrom going to be DeGrom? So they're waiting to get healthy. In the meantime, if the Mariners, I mean, this feels like an opportunity to me for the Mariners to like try and pick up some ground on Texas as they're trying to figure out the rotation and get guys back and get guys healthy. And, you know, this exact trip probably isn't the way to gain ground. This is going to be a tough one, honestly, with Baltimore and the Yankees. And then Nationals aren't good, but it's going to be the end of a long trip. So I think it makes it hard. But this is an opportunity stretch for the Mariners, I feel like, against Texas. And the Angels are just, they're just bad. They're just a
Yeah.
bad team.
They're the A's of years past.
Yeah. I mean, their second chance, you look at their team right now, and it's just, it's, you know, the Cole Tuckers of the world who bounced around the big leagues. And I mean, good for them. They're getting, there's a lot of guys getting kind of new life and second chances for the Angels right now. And it just, they're so different without Otani and without Trout. The Mariners have
Yeah.
faced them a million times the last few years. And I don't know how many times they got beat by just those two guys being great in a game, right? Those two have been two of the best players in the generation. And we've seen both of those guys single handedly in games beat the Mariners. And that's gone right now. That star power, that production in the middle is just gone. And it just changes the entire complexion of that team to me.
Absolutely. And speaking to the Astros, and this kind of speaks to how funny baseball can be at times. You know, last year we're talking about the strikeouts. This year we're talking about the strikeouts. I made a video the other day. The Mariners were from the other day, first place in strikeouts, of course. They were ahead of second place by like 7 or 8% in strikeouts. And then they were 70% more than the team that's best at avoiding strikeouts, which is the Astros. So the Astros are the best at avoiding strikeouts, yet they're near the bottom of the AL West, while the Mariners have the most strikeouts. They're at the top. So it's like, you know, we don't like one thing, we want another thing, but what we have is pretty good.
Yeah, no, it's right. I mean, at the end of the day, the end result is what matters the most. The strikeout thing is interesting. I think the conversation is interesting. I feel like in like Mariners world, as we've talked about this, I feel like especially when the Mariners were struggling, like the strikeout rate, if we were to put it in a pie, like the conversation in a pie, I feel like strikeout rate probably took up too much of the pie, and the lack of production probably didn't take up enough of the pie. Because you can't have, I mean, you can't have production and slug with a high strikeout rate, because I feel like the production was the issue. Now, they are going to be a team that strikes out. It's just when you look at how they're constructed, they're a team that's going to strike out. But I do feel like, especially with JP returning, I do feel like they can cut into that and not be dead last starting today. But we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and like Reflect the Sun comments, great pitching is like the Legion of Boom. It's like the best defense. You know, defense wins championships. Having the best
Yeah.
rotation and pitching in baseball is pretty similar. Now,
No,
I'm
that's
curious.
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's been some rumors that have been starting to come out, or at least, you know, reporters that have been trying to figure out trade scenarios for later on in the year. The Mariners, of course, it would be nice to have an impact bat. You know, there's the trade scenario for Pete Alonso. I think it was Jeff Passan just came out. Luis Robert, they're going to go after him. They're going to make a big splash. What do you think? You know, what is a realistic spot for them to target in the field? And then, you know, what kind of power do you think they might go get, or what names have you thought of?
This is a really good question. I have two thoughts immediately. First is, okay, because the hard thing about the trade deadline for me the last couple of years is there just haven't been a lot of sellers, and sellers with something to offer, I guess, has been the other part of that. Because with the rule changes and the extra wild card, there's just been more teams in the mix, and
Mhm.
there are fewer teams rebuilding, which I think is great. I think it's good when there's more teams being competitive and trying to win and everything else. So there hasn't been a ton on the market. So the first question is, okay, which teams are going to be out of it? I think clearly the White Sox and Robert, that's going to be a guy in the mix because the White Sox aren't going anywhere. Now, a team like the Blue Jays, I find to be really interesting because they haven't played that well in a really tough division, and they have a pretty steep hill to climb to get back in, and they have looming decisions to make because Vladdy is coming up. Vlad Guerrero is coming up at the end of next year. So what are they going to do? Is now the time to try and make a move? Because their problems have been on the offensive side of things, funny enough. And Bichette has struggled as well. Bichette, they at least have bought out his arbitration year, so he'll be there for a few more years. But, the Bichette Vladdy era, which the Blue Jays are in right now, is that coming to an end? Are they going to pull the trigger on Vlad? So there are a few situations like that, like the St. Louis Cardinals. What are they going to do with their corner guys? If they fall out of it and don't feel like they can get back into it. That division always seems to be anyone's guess. But so I guess the first thing is what's going to happen with teams like that and how many impact bats will be available. The Mariners situation specifically is really interesting. And to me, when people ask, like, should the Mariners go after Robert? And the answer for me always, and I never know this is the problem. We're just kind of on the outside observing it. Is like, well, yeah, of course Robert fits. Of course. The question is, what do you have to give up to get him? And that's always the question in my mind. Like, there's a ton of guys out there that would help. And the Mariners have enough flexibility. Like, I don't think you necessarily have to say we need a X, whatever position. I think you can move enough guys around to fit in a bat. The question is, what are opposing teams going to ask for, and what are the Mariners willing to give up? Because I know there are guys in their system they are super high on. And I don't know if anyone's untouchable. I always feel like, hey, if somebody offered you the moon for somebody, you would say yes. So I don't know if untouchable is a real thing or not, but I do feel like Montes, Young, Emerson. I mean, there's some guys they are really high on, and they think will have big futures for the Mariners, and pretty soon. So that's the trick, right? Is how much are you willing to dive into that and trade? I mean, for a guy like Robert, it's going to be a steep cost. So I don't know. It's it's times like
Yeah.
that where I'm thrilled I'm not making that decision, but
Right.
it's going to be a decision they're going to have to make. And I just feel like a guy like Robert too, they're going to get a lot for him. Somebody is going to give up a lot, although that's no guarantee either because of he's a super talented guy. I love watching him play, but he's got a pretty long injury history as well. And how does that play into it? So I've said a lot of words without really answering your question, but I think I find the trade deadline so complicated because of those reasons. And it's still the middle of May. We just don't know how this thing is going to shake out. Like, maybe there'll be a couple other teams that struggle and there'll be surprise guys available. So I guess we'll see how
Yeah.
it plays out.
No, I mean, it's all a great conversation. And like you said, it's all so complex and there's so many different variables and, what team decides to sell. And like one scenario that we saw, Marine Layer Podcast came out with one, Kyle Tucker from the Astros. I think he has like a year left after this year. I was like, the Mariners and the Astros will not make a big trade like that. There's no way that the Mariners would trade their top prospects to their division rival. Like, Kyle Tucker is amazing. It looks like he's hitting a home run every at bat that I turn on. But do you think the Mariners and the Astros would make a trade that would have any impact like that?
I don't know. Isn't it so hard to envision after the last couple of years? I mean, I know they made a trade a couple of years ago, but I even feel like things have changed since
The
then.
Graveman trade for Toro.
Yeah, right. But but I feel like there's been so much that's happened since then too. It's really hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine them trading Tucker at all. But when at a certain point when a guy gets this close to free agency, it just feels like an extension's not going to happen. So if you're Houston, you're going to have to make a call. That's a tough call. I love Tucker. I think he's one of the great hitters in the game, and he is really going to be sought after if he hits the free agent market. And just from a Mariners perspective, if he found himself out of the division, I don't think anyone would complain about that.
Right.
I mean, every Mariner fan would love in a Mariners uniform, obviously, but I think next best, just like Ohtani, like the Mariners don't have to deal with him X number of times a year now. And I think you could say the same thing about Tucker. He's that kind of hitter that, hey, get him out of here. I don't want to deal with him, 13 times a year or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, he's one of those guys that every time he comes up to the bat, just like Yordan Alvarez, it's like he's gonna do it right here. I just know it. So
you know what? And I got to tell you, there's something about in that building too, especially with Alvarez. I'm not kidding. Every time he comes up in a big spot and it gets super loud in there, it's domed, and he comes up and he's terrifying. And if it's a close game, it's just like this is no good. This is no fun. The Mariners have handled him pretty well so far this year, but it's just one of those things where you just don't have a good feeling when he's strolling to the plate. That's for sure.
And another intriguing name, I mean, this one's extremely unlikely because he has a lot of years of control, but Mason Miller from the A's. If the Mariners could use a bullpen arm, they have Brash out for the year now. Santos hasn't come back yet. Stanek has been pretty solid. They've really leaned on Munoz. Can't rely on that the entire year. I mean, that's an unrealistic proposal, but yeah, a lot of things might start happening this next, month to 2 months for sure.
Aaron, right before this call, Aaron Goldsmith and I were out at dinner, and we actually talked about Miller quite a bit because we were talking about it from the A's perspective and other teams' perspectives, and we kind of landed on we felt like the A's are probably going to trade him at the deadline because he does. It's the thing about Robert. It's the same thing. Like he has an injury history too. It's why they moved him to the bullpen. He was a starter and he kept running into injury problems, and he's obviously flourished in the bullpen. And if you're the A's, man, what can you land for a closer the way he's pitching right now at the deadline? And it looks like a lot given, I think about, the Mariners are getting ready to play Baltimore. I think about what he would mean for a team like Baltimore, who has a back of the bullpen that's struggling a little bit. So if he's available, it won't just be the Mariners calling. That's for sure. It'll be some other teams. And I think you're right. The Mariners do have some work to do to figure out the back end of the bullpen. Going into the season, it looked pretty clear cut. You had a 3-headed monster coming into the season. Unfortunately, no Brash, which is a big loss. I think Brash was one of the best relievers in baseball. And we've seen it come up a few times this year where the Mariners have needed a strikeout. And last year, they could go to Brash, who had a 45% strikeout rate, and more times than not, he'd get you that strikeout. He's such a valuable weapon to have. And I don't know, maybe we took it for granted too, because you could call on him in sticky situations, and a lot of times he'd get you out of it. And they haven't had that this year. And hopefully they'll get Santos back. That can be part of the mix. But they have some work to do to kind of – it's not as clear cut on a nightly basis. I feel like Scott Servais and his staff have to work harder every night to try and figure out how to navigate things to get it to Munoz. And Munoz has had to pick up the slack sometimes too. He's had to go multiple innings. So there's still some work to do at the back end. That's for sure.
Yeah. Jumping back to the offense, I just saw another stat pop up here. The Mariners are the only team in the majors that has yet to allow an opposing starter to complete 9 innings this season. Mariners have gone a franchise record 43 games to begin the season without allowing an opposing pitcher to complete 7 innings. Yeah, I guess with the offense, even though they haven't produced a ton, they've been stingy enough to get the guys out. Yeah. Any additional thoughts on the offense?
Yeah, I was looking at that the other day, and I think it was interesting. It's funny too in contrast because it seems like Mariners starters are doing that all the time, like going seven
Right.
innings, and they're doing it to the opponents on the other side, but opponents aren't doing it to them. I do think there is like I don't think it's coincidence. I do think they see a lot of pitches, and which obviously helps. They just haven't always been able to take advantage of it, unfortunately, this early in the season. Like they would get a guy out and then get into the soft part of the bullpen and not be able to do enough with that. And I think it's probably not something we talk about enough in modern baseball, like the A side of a bullpen and the B side of a bullpen. And I just feel like it's so valuable to play in front in Major League Baseball because you're just if you're facing the A sides of bullpens consistently, you're just not going to win games. You can't come back consistently against those high quality arms. You think about the Astros might be the extreme of this. Like when you're down to the Astros starting in the seventh inning, you're going to see Hader, Presley, and Abreu. And I know they haven't been great this year for the most part, but they're really good pitchers and they'll be fine. As opposed to playing in front, you're going to see the other side of the bullpen. You see Montero and whoever else they bring out, and that's such a huge gulf. And every team has that to one extent or another. And that's why I think like if you can get the starter out, if you can get a lead early, if you can face the B side of the bullpen, you have a better chance to add on. Like all that stuff matters during the course of the season.
Yeah, and putting together those quality at bats and waiting for your pitch, working full counts, and really draining that starting pitcher. I guess that the Mariners have excelled in that. So, yeah, it'll be really interesting to see these next couple series: the Orioles, the Yankees, and then as you mentioned at the Nationals, and then come home against the Astros, and then against the Angels. Are there any certain matchup that you're looking most forward to in the upcoming couple? The entire Orioles and Yankees series are going to be much watch baseball, but
Yeah, this is going to be great. I think it was really important for the Mariners to get 2 series wins coming out on this trip. Like losing that Kansas City game, the final one would have hurt 500 on the homestand and going on to this trip because this trip is going to be really difficult. Baltimore is a really good team. They're explosive. The Yankees are a really good team. Same thing. They're explosive. Uh, I know Baltimore hasn't officially announced their starters yet, so I'm curious to see how it falls. From what I saw, it looks like they could miss Burns and Bradish, which would be pretty amazing if you could draw 3 against Baltimore and not have to face those 2 guys. Like that would be incredible. So we'll see how it plays out. But it's going to be a tough matchup. They're offensively, they're really good. I know their outfield is currently struggling, but that top of the order, Rutschman is on fire. Gunnar Henderson has been great, and that's a really tough top of the order to deal with. I really like how the 2 teams match up together. I think it's going to be a really good series. Miller in particular, and then Castillo and Kirby. I mean, you like how those 3 line up. And if you're not facing Burns and Bradish too, like the Mariners will have the starting pitching advantage in all 3. The ballpark makes it so interesting to me now, and just how like it is wild when you go there, the difference compared to how it used to be. Because left field
it's a
is
big wall.
mile away. Yeah, it's a huge wall and it's a mile away. I feel like if you get it one in over that thing, you should get 2 home runs because it is forever away. And they've kind of built their team around that. When you look at they have a lot of lefty power, which is great because the righties will just hit it to die, which also makes the matchup interesting with all the right-handers that the Mariners offer in the rotation. So I think there's a lot of interesting aspects to this Baltimore Mariners matchup that I'm super intrigued by. And then 4 games in New York, if you can come away with a split, that's great because there's such a scary team in that building, mostly because that short right field. If you ask me my least favorite aspects to any ballpark, the Crawford box is number one, and right field at Yankee Stadium is number two for me. So they're just terrifying. It feels like Judge and Stanton could just pop something up to right field and it goes out.
Right, absolutely. And then I just decided to pop over to the Texas Rangers schedule. They have
Hmm.
3 home games against the Angels, and then they head out for a bit of a rough road schedule with 3 at the Phillies and then 3 at the Twins. So it kind of lines up well. That the Twins, they won like 9 in a row or even more than that. The Phillies are obviously a stacked team, so could line up with the Rangers and the Mariners lineup, both going through their tough, one of their tough stretches at the same times. So after these next couple weeks, we'll really see where things stand.
I like the Twins. I think they're a good team, and I think they're especially a tough matchup for the Mariners. And we saw that play out in Minnesota. They stack up all those lefty bats, and it just provides the Mariners with a tough matchup. We saw it last year, and we saw it this year at their place too. It's one of those things. When teams match up, sometimes they're a good matchup for you. Sometimes they're not a good matchup for you. And Minnesota looks like a matchup that's not great for the Mariners, but we'll see what they can do against the Rangers.
Yeah. To wrap it up, we'll end with some fan questions. If you're on the live stream, make sure to comment a question. We'll get it answered before we jump off here. First question here is from Aquario. How good is Luke Raley? What do you think his ceiling is? If there's a comparable guy out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In fact, I essentially asked that same question to Scott Service the other day because, as I mentioned earlier, I find his tools super intriguing with the way he runs, with his power, the way he can move around. So I asked Scott the same thing, like, what kind of player do you have in Luke Raley? And he said, like, what you're seeing right now is the kind of player he can be. And think about the impact he's made the past week. Like, I don't think it's realistic to think he's going to slash what he's been slashing this last week and carry that for the rest of the season. But I do think that gives you a glimpse to the player he can be. I think the ceiling question is a great question. And I honestly don't know if anyone has the answer to that. And part of it is like he hasn't last year was really his first full year in the majors. And he had a great first half and he struggled in the second half. And I just I don't know if we know the answer to that. It's a good question. He's a fun guy to really dream on because of all the ability and all the tools. And maybe last year he did figure it out. Maybe he's carrying that forward right now. So it's a great question that I don't have the answer to, but I'm anxious to see what it looks like.
And because when the trade was initially made, I made the player profile on Luke Raley. And at the time last year, he was one of 10 players with a 80 percentile or higher in both sprint speed and barrel percentage. So, top 10 guy in both those categories is his ceiling, which is
that's rare. That's rare.
Good.
Yeah, that's really rare.
With like
guys like
Buxton
that
and Luis Robert and those guys.
Yeah. Yeah, guys like that don't come around very often. It's a really unique skill set.
Another question here. Do we know how JP is doing after he was hit on the hand yesterday?
Unfortunately, no. We were kind of curious about that too. I don't have we won't know until we get to the ballpark. I have not had a JP sighting at the hotel anywhere or anything. So I can't.
I heard he didn't
anything.
travel with the team.
Yeah, which he wasn't going to anyway because the team left
Okay.
right after the game, and he played in Tacoma that night. So if getting to Baltimore, he would have traveled on his own anyway. So unless there were people hanging out at the Baltimore airport, there's no way for us to know unless someone has seen him in Baltimore. So I don't know. We'll find out tomorrow. I'm hoping for the best. Obviously, that is the very last thing anyone wants to see in a rehab game. Like he's just trying to get his at bats in, get his timing down, and that was brutal to see.
And it looks like Divish said that his hand is swollen and he won't be traveling to Baltimore. So we'll see if he makes it in the Yankees series, though.
Yeah, that's a bummer because he was the original plan was for him to be here. I think he would have
That
been
was his last game.
in the starting lineup. Yeah, I think he would have
Yeah.
been in the starting lineup tomorrow against Baltimore. That's unfortunate.
How is George's knee doing? I know that there was a rumor about him having an achy knee, but I think he made a start after that, and he looked just fine.
Yeah, he's looked fine. It's funny. I don't know if we know the full story there. He's had knee soreness a couple of times, and I know they've backed off a couple of starts. Like there was one in particular where I wish I remember the pitch count offhand, but it was like 80 something. And we've seen George. It was a close game, and of course we've seen George go that extra inning a million times, and he didn't. We're like, oh, what's going on? And there's some knee soreness there. I think for the most part, it hasn't affected him. Like the next days, we've seen him with his regular routine out there. So I can't tell you how sore it's been for him. I can just say he's looked great and he's managing it really well. And I'm not that concerned about it, big picture, and especially, man, you talk about soreness. It's not elbow soreness. It's not something like that you would cringe to hear. So
Right.
I think the situation seems like they're managing it pretty well.
Did you hear Munoz after the game? He said, when I'm angry like George, that's when I'm my best. When I'm angry on the mound. Furious George.
Yeah, I feel like the Mariners pitching staff as a whole they're like channeling their inner demons when they're on the mound. Because Logan has that same sort of thing. Like he's got the alter.
Turns into Walter.
He's got
Walter,
Walter
totally
in
different
there.
guy.
Yeah, he's got the different personality. George too, man. When he's on the mound, he's there to get you. Like on his non-pitch days, he's great guy, fun to talk to. He's the kind of guy on his pitch day though, just let him be, because he is there to eat you alive. Yeah, and he's channeled that. It's very funny. I love the guys. Like Logan couldn't be nicer. Like the greatest dude in the world. Yet put him on the mound, and he's there to get you. I love that. I love competitiveness like that, where you just flip a switch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't gotten George on the sideline yet because it seems like he's always pretty locked in. He just kind of runs right by. He's doing his thing, But I'll get him on at some point.
He loves shagging is the other part. He loves like
shagging,
being in the outfield and shagging balls. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So usually, like he's either running out and doing his work, or he's running out to be in the outfield. Yeah, he's always busy doing something.
Awesome. Well, Gary, really appreciate you coming on. Another Gary Hill Jr. episode in the books. Thank you for joining us, and looking forward to these upcoming series, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks again. Can't wait to do it soon.
All right. See ya.